I remember the first time we were in the same room. There was something in the air, something neither of us could ignore. I had always heard the stories, whispers from women who'd stepped into the world of forbidden desire, eager to share their secrets. Some claimed that men of color were different in bed, wild, uncontainable, and incredibly strong. I had always brushed it off as just fantasy, until I met him. The night we crossed that line was different. There was no turning back. The hotel room had the scent of expensive cologne, and the soft light created shadows on his face. He was tall, strong, and his presence filled the room without him saying a word. I could feel his eyes on me, almost as if they were burning through my skin. It made something inside me stir. For the first time in ages, I felt like a woman. Not a wife, not someone's caretaker. Just me, a woman who wanted something beyond the ordinary. He sat on the edge of the bed, arms folded, those deep brown eyes locked on mine. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His confidence was enough to quiet any doubt I had left. My heart raced, but not from fear. There was excitement, anticipation. My body was betraying me. Every nerve seemed to come alive, humming with a desire I didn't know was there. I had to fight the urge to look away, to stop this madness. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was something magnetic about him, something primal. I'd heard the rumors, sure, but now I was standing on the edge of experiencing it all firsthand. The talk about men of color, their size, their endurance, it all buzzed in my mind. But in that moment, I wasn't sure whether it was the physical pull or the thrill of doing something forbidden that excited me more. He stood up slowly, his movements controlled, deliberate. "You don't have to do this," he said in a low, calming voice. "But you want to," he added. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. I nodded, struggling to steady my breath, my pulse quickening. "Tell me you want me," he whispered, his voice rich and commanding. The way he spoke made my knees weak. My mouth went dry. I had never felt such raw, unfiltered desire. "I want you," I said, my voice shaky. But there was no hiding the truth. I needed him. His hands were on me before I could think twice. The feel of his skin against mine sent a shock through my body, lighting me up in ways I'd never felt before. He was everything they'd said and more. But as I lay beneath him, the weight of my life, my husband, my vows, my secrets, pressed on my chest. Before I could even think, his lips found mine, and all the guilt disappeared into a whirlwind of passion. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more about my forbidden adventures, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss the rest of my story. Now let me take you back to where it all began, when curiosity first led me down this dangerous path. I never planned for this. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would risk everything for a taste of something forbidden. But that was before the whisper started, before I met him, before the idea of a man who could make me feel more alive than I had in years even crossed my mind. My marriage wasn't bad. It was comfortable, predictable. I loved my husband, or at least I thought I did. We had built a life together, shared meals, memories, and a bed that had over time become more about routine than passion. Sure, we still had sex, but it was always the same. His touch had become so familiar, almost mechanical. No surprises, no excitement, just the same motions over and over. And then there were the stories. At first, it was just rumors, whispers at work, a friend joking about how well-endowed men of color were. I scoffed at first. It seemed like just another myth. But the more I heard, the more curious I became. These weren't just jokes. These were women telling me about their experiences, their faces flushed, voices low as if speaking about something sacred, something powerful. It was the way they talked about it, the way their eyes widened when they spoke about the men who had taken them to places they'd never been before, who left them trembling with pleasure in a way their husbands never could. I couldn't deny it. Curiosity took hold of me, gnawing at my mind, filling me with a desire I'd never known before. I never told anyone what I was thinking. How could I? But every time I saw a man of color, at work or on the street, my eyes would linger, studying, wondering. What if the stories were true? What if there was more to them than I was willing to admit? And that's when I met him. He was new at the company, brought in as a consultant for a big project. I noticed him the first time we spoke. He had that presence, that confidence that seemed to demand attention. It wasn't just his looks, though. God, he was handsome, but something else. There was an aura about him, a cool, effortless confidence. I couldn't place it at first, but every time he entered a room, I could feel the tension shift. Then, one evening after a long meeting, our paths crossed in the hallway. He smiled at me, and my stomach flipped. His smile wasn't just friendly, it was inviting, as if he knew exactly what was going through my mind. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice deep and smooth. I paused for a moment, but something about him made me open up. "Just tired," I said, offering a weak smile. "It's been a long day." He nodded, then leaned in closer, his scent overwhelming, woody, musky, and undeniably intoxicating. "I know just the thing for that," he said, a slight smile on his face. Before I could respond, he gave me a look, so suggestive, so full of intention, it was impossible to ignore. My heart raced. I knew exactly what he meant, and already I was drawn to him. "How about we grab a drink? I know a place nearby. I promise it'll help you unwind." It seemed casual, no pressure. But as I stood there, looking into his dark eyes, I realized this wasn't just about a drink. This was the moment, the one where I crossed the line. That drink turned into more than I expected. A simple invitation, a casual "let's unwind," and suddenly everything I thought I knew about myself, about desire, was about to shatter. The bar was dimly lit, the kind of place where the music was soft, but the air was thick with something heavier, a tension you could almost taste. The bartender knew him by name, which surprised me. He was a regular here, I realized. The kind of man who didn't need to announce his presence, he just was. And I couldn't stop looking at him, even though I tried to keep my composure. He sat across from me, leaning back in his chair, a bottle of whiskey between us. His fingers traced the rim of his glass, and every time his eyes met mine, a jolt of heat shot straight through me. It was as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Each glance, every small movement designed to pull me in even further. I tried to keep the conversation light, but it was hard to focus when every word that came from his mouth hit me in a way no conversation ever had before. There was an ease about him, a confidence that was both comforting and unnerving. He didn't have to impress me, he was just himself, and that was enough. "So tell me," he said, his voice smooth like honey, "what's a woman like you doing at a place like this?" I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. "Just needed to get out for a bit," I said. "Life's been unpredictable." He raised an eyebrow. "Predictable, huh? I can imagine that gets old." I nodded, feeling my body tense as he leaned in slightly, closing the distance between us. "It's more than that," I admitted, surprising myself with how easily the words came. "I guess I'm looking for something different." His gaze deepened, no longer playful but knowing, as if he understood exactly what I meant. "Something more exciting?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I swallowed, my pulse quickening. Was he talking about what I thought he was talking about? My mind screamed at me to be careful, to pull back. But my body was already answering him, urging me forward. "You could say that," I replied, my voice barely audible. My breath felt shallow, each second stretching out, filled with tension I wasn't sure how to handle. He smiled then, slowly, deliberately. "I think I can help with that," he said, his words hanging in the air like a promise. And just like that, my mind screamed in protest, but my body was already moving, reaching for him. Pulled by an invisible force I didn't understand. He stood up casually, as though this was the most natural thing in the world. Without a word, he slid his hand into mine and led me out of the bar. The drive to his place was quick, the city streets flashing by in a blur of street lights and neon signs. I should have been thinking about my husband, about the life I'd built with him. But I wasn't. All I could think about was him, his touch, his voice. The way he made me feel alive, like a woman full of possibilities. When we entered his apartment, the lights were low, and the silence was thick with expectation. He didn't waste any time. His lips were on mine almost instantly, and all that was left in my mind was the undeniable truth of what was about to happen. There was no turning back now. His hands were everywhere at once, on my shoulders, my waist, my back. Each touch sent a jolt of pleasure through me. He kissed me deeply, passionately, his tongue exploring my mouth in a way that made my knees weak. The heat between us grew quickly, and soon I could feel the outline of his body pressing against mine. My breath hitched as I felt the hardness of him, and all the rumors, all the stories I had heard, rushed back into my mind. It was true. Everything I had heard was true. But it wasn't just his physicality that was intoxicating. It was the way he made me feel, desired, needed. More than I'd felt in years. Every touch, every kiss, was an invitation to lose myself in a way I hadn't dared to before. He didn't speak much. There was no need to. His hands did all the talking, taking control in a way that felt thrilling, almost dangerous. It was exactly what I had been missing, what I hadn't even known I was craving. His hands were firm and confident, his lips hot against my skin, leaving a trail of fire wherever they touched. I lost track of time. I wasn't a wife anymore, a mother, a dutiful woman. I was just a woman who wanted, no, needed, this man in a way I couldn't explain. Every kiss, every touch, felt like a revelation. I could feel the raw intensity of his presence, the palpable power that radiated from him. It was unlike anything I had ever known before. There was no denying it. I wanted him and I needed him. As his hand slipped under my clothes, lifting me effortlessly and pressing me against the wall, I understood in that instant there was no turning back. This was real, and there was an undeniable connection between us that had taken root. If you're enjoying the story and want to know what happens next, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's so much more in store. You definitely won't want to miss out. Stay tuned as I take you deeper into this journey of temptation. In the quiet aftermath, I should have been overcome with shame. Guilt should have overwhelmed me, but instead, I felt more alive than I ever had. And that realization sent a shiver of fear down my spine. The fear came from understanding how far I had gone, how willing I was to cross boundaries I had once sworn I'd never approach. Lying next to him, tangled in the sheets, I could hear the cities hum beneath us through the open window. His arm draped over my waist, and I could feel his warmth, his presence, like a force I couldn't escape. I should have pulled away. I should have thought of my husband, the man I had vowed to share my life with. But my mind was far from him. It was consumed by this man beside me, the one who had awakened something in me I had long buried. He turned to face me, a knowing smile curving at the corners of his lips. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice rich and teasing, daring me to speak the truth. I couldn't lie. I met his eyes and whispered, "Good. Better than I've felt in years." A grin spread across his face, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He knew exactly what he had stirred inside me. Desire, hunger, a need that had been hidden for far too long. His hand moved to my thigh, his fingers drawing gentle circles that sent heat spiraling through me. "I told you," he murmured, his voice a low, sensual growl. "I can give you exactly what you're looking for." And he did, again and again. Each time was different, intense, wild, unforgettable. It wasn't just about the physical act. It was an escape from everything I thought I knew about intimacy. He made me feel things I'd never experienced before. Each touch was a reminder of how much I had been missing. He wasn't just confident, he was in complete control. And that was exactly what I craved. But it wasn't just about the pleasure. It was about freedom. The freedom to be more than just a wife, a caretaker, a reliable partner. With him, I was just a woman, no expectations, no obligations. Just pure, unrestrained desire. The affair began to take on a life of its own. I found myself meeting him whenever I could, sneaking away from my responsibilities to be with him in hidden corners of the city, quiet hotel rooms, dark alleys, places where no one could see us. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but the excitement of the secrecy, the danger of being caught, made it feel almost thrilling. Each time we met, I shed a little more of the woman I had been, and embraced the woman I was becoming. He didn't push me for anything emotional. He was patient, calm, always in control. It was exactly what I needed, but as the days went by, I began to wonder. What did he want from this? Was I just another conquest? Or was I something more? At first, I didn't care. All I cared about was how he made me feel, how he made me forget everything else. But over time, I began to sense a shift. My husband noticed. He wasn't stupid, and he wasn't blind. Something had changed, and he could feel it. "Where are you going tonight?" he asked one evening, his voice calm but laced with suspicion. "You've been working late a lot lately." My pulse quickened. He had never questioned me before like this. Just a meeting with the team, I replied, trying to sound casual. But the tension was thick in the air. He gave me a long, searching look before nodding and walking away. But I knew he didn't believe me. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the silence that followed. For the first time, I wondered if I was playing with fire. If my husband could sense something, how long could I keep this secret? But the rush, the thrill of doing something forbidden was addictive. It wasn't just about the pleasure anymore. It was the secrecy, the excitement of living on the edge, that kept me coming back for more. Every stolen moment felt like I was living two lives, one rooted in the past, and one wild and reckless. I began to crave the danger. The fact that my husband was starting to sense something wasn't right only made it more exhilarating. I was balancing on the edge of two worlds, one I knew well, and one I couldn't resist. Every time we met, it felt like a dangerous game. One where every touch, every look, every whispered word only intensified the connection. He didn't need to say much. His body spoke for him, and his confidence made me forget everything else. We met in places where no one would recognize us. Dimly lit bars, private hotel rooms, quiet parks after dark. Each time felt like it could be the last, and that thought only fueled the intensity. I didn't just want him anymore, I needed him. The way his hands touched my body, how he made me feel wanted, powerful. It was something I had never felt with my husband. He would pull me close, his breath warm against my ear, his lips kissing my neck. And for those brief moments, everything else faded. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a mother. I was just a woman. His woman. And I started thinking about my husband, the man who had never been able to give me what the stranger could. He was kind, reliable, and good. Was that enough anymore? The line between right and wrong became hard to see. The affair didn't just stir up lust in me. It brought out a part of me I had either forgotten or never knew was there. The wildness, the freedom, the pure power of feeling wanted like this. One night, after a particularly passionate meeting in a quiet hotel room, I lay in his arms, my heart still pounding from the pleasure he had given me. He was different from the men I had known before. Not just in how he looked, but in how he made me feel. He didn't try to cover things up with fake tenderness. He wasn't pretending. He was real, and I couldn't get enough of him. "You like that, don't you?" he asked, his voice low and rich, like a promise he would never break. I nodded, breathless. "I do?" He smiled, his lips brushing my forehead. "You don't have to pretend with me. I can tell you want this, want me." And he was right. I did. More than I had ever wanted anything in my life. But as I lay there in the dim light, a thought kept bothering me. A thought I couldn't get rid of. I was playing with fire. And sooner or later, the truth would catch up to me. The truth was, I had started lying. Not just to my husband, but to myself. Every time I snuck away to see him, I told myself it was just for a moment. Just to break away from the routine of my life. But as time passed, the lies grew bigger, more convincing. I wasn't just sneaking around for sex anymore. I was lying about how I felt. I was lying about what I wanted from this. Each lie made me feel more desperate. My heart raced when I was with him, and the tension between us was undeniable. He started asking questions. Questions I didn't have answers for. Not just about what I wanted physically, but about what I wanted out of life. About what I was looking for. And how long I planned to keep this going. "What will you do when this ends?" he asked one night, while I lay next to him. My body still tingling from the last wave of pleasure he had given me. I stared at the ceiling, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead." His eyes never left mine. "You're running from something, aren't you?" I didn't want to admit it, but I knew he was right. I was running from a life that no longer made me feel alive. Running from a marriage that had become a comfortable routine. One that left me wanting more. And when I was with him, I felt like I was finally living again. The weight of being a wife, a mother, a dutiful partner. None of that mattered when I was with him. But I didn't want to talk about that. Not yet. "I don't know," I said again, my voice softer. "I just want to be here. With you." His expression softened, and for a brief moment, there was tenderness in his eyes. But then it vanished, replaced by the intense look I had come to crave. "Maybe that's enough for now," he said, and kissed me again, pulling me back into the tangled sheets. But even as I lost myself in him, in us, a part of me couldn't help but wonder. How much longer could I keep the secret? How long would the lies hold up before everything fell apart? One night, I came home late after another heated encounter with him, my heart still racing, my body still buzzing with memories of what had just happened. As I walked in the door, my husband was sitting in the living room, waiting for me. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Maybe suspicion, or maybe just concern. "You've been working late a lot lately," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. I froze, my pulse quickening. He wasn't asking. He was telling me. For the first time, I felt the weight of my double life pressing down on me. The silence in the room was suffocating. My husband sat there, his eyes locked on mine, waiting for an answer to a question I knew he wasn't saying out loud. He didn't need to. The tension in the air said everything. The lies had caught up with me, and now I felt crushed by them. "You've been working late," he said again, his voice calm but heavy with something else, something I couldn't quite place. "But it's not just that, is it? You're different." I stood frozen in the doorway, my keys still in my hand, realizing slowly. He knew. He had known something was wrong for weeks, maybe longer. The late nights, the distant look in my eyes when I came home, the way I no longer cared about the little things we used to share. He had been watching, waiting, hoping it wasn't true. But now, the truth was clear. My mind raced. How could I explain this? How could I tell him what I had done? The affair that had taken over me, the hunger I had fed, and the secrets I had hidden. The man I had promised to love didn't deserve this. But the woman standing in front of him, torn between guilt and desire, was someone else. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely a sound. He stood up slowly, never taking his eyes off me. "Sorry," he repeated, as if the word didn't even come close to fitting what had happened. "Sorry for what?" "Sorry for what you've been doing behind my back." I flinched at his words, but I couldn't argue. He was right. I had betrayed him. I had crossed a line I hadn't even seen until it was too late. "I don't know what to say," I said, my throat tight with emotion. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." He took a step toward me, his face showing a mix of pain and confusion. "You didn't mean for it to happen." His voice trembled, though he tried to stay calm. "And what about me? What about us?" I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came. How could I explain what I'd felt? How could I tell him I had been chasing something, a wild, forbidden thrill, that left me empty when it was over, even though I'd wanted it so badly? "Is it him?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Is it the guy you've been seeing?" I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't keep denying it. I nodded, feeling my chest tighten with the weight of it all. "Do you love him?" His voice was soft, but the question hit harder than anything else he had said. "I don't know," I replied, my eyes filling with tears. "I don't."